joining me again on my channel. Today we're going to be looking at a couple new releases from Spellbinders. And first up, we're going to be looking at the Seahorse Kisses release. The products that I will be showing you today include the Seahorse Garden Stamp and Die Set, the Castaway 3D Embossing Folder, and the Seahorse Kisses Sentiments Hot Foil Plate and Die Set. And here you see the 3 sentiments that are part of that set. I hot foiled 2 of them with matte gold foil and another one in opaque black. So that's what we're going to be using today. And this collection really inspired me to pull out my watercolors, which is something I haven't done in a while, and I realized how much I miss doing it. So here I have some scraps of watercolor paper from my stash, and I'm just rubbing the stamp really good with my fingers because I haven't used it yet and I want to make a good impression. And we're going to be heat embossing the stamp with gold embossing powder today. And you'll see me stamp it 3 times. Because it's watercolor paper and there's texture, I just want to make sure that it leaves a really good impression for the powder. And this is Hero Art's gold embossing powder. I like to have the embossing powders that I use a lot in containers, and I keep them right next to me in a drawer, so it makes it really convenient. So I think I have gold, silver, clear, and white. Alright, so I said I was going to watercolor, but I'm actually going to watercolor with Distress inks. And I'm pulling out a couple new brushes that haven't been used yet. These are Zen watercolor brushes, and I believe I ended up using just the round size 4 brush today. So there are the color inks that I'll be using, and I will have a full list of colors that I use on my blog. You can find a link to my blog in the description below. So I just press the ink onto my glass mat, and I have a glass of water off to the side. And the first thing I'm going to do is just drop some clean water onto the image, and then I'll come bring my color in. And we're going to go kind of slow at first so you can see me paint, but then we'll speed up a little bit because there's nothing really earth-shattering here. I'm not an expert watercolor artist, but you don't have to be. Really just drop some color in. I really was going for just a colorful blend here for the Seahorse, and so I'm just I kind of started cleaning my brush in between colors, and then I kind of just said forget that, and I just started dipping in all the colors because I didn't mind mixing them. And then I'm just going to bring in a little bit more pink just to brighten things up a little bit. And it's just really relaxing. I forgot how relaxing watercoloring can be. I've been doing so much die cutting over the past year, which I still love. But it's nice when a collection comes along or a new product comes along that inspires you to try something different or to go back to something that you just haven't done in a long time. Now here you see me, I had just taken some clean water on my brush just to get a little bit of paint that I had gone outside of the lines. So you just put some water on it, dab it with a paper towel, and it just pulls it right up. And that's the great thing about watercoloring. It's very forgiving. So we're just going to finish up with a little bit of pink. And it really didn't take me very long at all to color this little guy. And there he is. All right, let's talk about this embossing folder. I don't know what it is about this embossing folder. I think the first time I used a 3D embossing folder, I had that wow moment. And here you're going to see me spray the paper before I put it in. And I do that just to prevent cracking. But when I took the paper out of this embossing folder, it was that wow moment again. And I'm not saying that I don't love all my other 3D embossing folders, but there's just something about this. I think it's because, and you can kind of see it on film right there, it's just the 3D effect of this folder is just really visible. And I think it's just because it doesn't cover the whole panel. I don't know. It's amazing. And it makes me want to put water creatures on every card from now on so that I can use this embossing folder. All right, so we're just going to do some simple blending today with Distress Oxides. And I have this big Altenew blending tool out. It's very wide and flat, and it's really good for getting very soft blends. And that's what I'm going for on this card. So right now I'm using Cracked Pistachio. And you'll see there's an area that looks kind of splotchy because I didn't let my paper dry. I was a little impatient when it came out of the embossing folder, but that's okay. It kind of goes with the watery theme, and it's going to kind of work to my advantage. Now I'm coming in with Salvage Patina Distress Oxide and just blending both colors a little bit heavier. And it really didn't take much. So after that, I'm going to splatter some water drops on, which is always a good thing to do on a Distress Oxide background. It just kind of makes it look more watery. And then I'm going to come in with the same color of Distress ink. And I'm going to put that on my glass mat, water it down, and just splatter those colors. And again, this is just adding to that watery look. And here I'm just using a regular watercolor brush to do that. So now I'm just kind of gonna play around with placement. There's my sentiment from the Seahorse Kisses set. And I love that it has a matching die. So now I'm really going to bring out the detail of this 3D embossing folder. I'm going to rub some antique linen ink right onto the 3D area. And you'll see, or maybe you can see, that I kind of smudged a little bit into the water area. And that's okay. I'll show you how I get rid of that in a little bit. But I'm just going to rub it all over, and it just really brings out that detail. So here you see me coming in with a wet paper towel, and I'm just dabbing up those little brown areas. And you'll never know it was there. I was going to come in with a darker color for the netting, or the whatever that is, a net. But the antique linen just worked so well with the gold embossing powder and the gold foil that I used for the sentiment. So here I'm pointing at the little bubble images from the stamp set. And again, I'm just going to add more watery details to this card. So I'm stamping that with the blue and green Distress Oxides that I had used before. And I'm not really sure why I pulled out my MISTI for these tiny little stamps. You see me there just coming in with my acrylic block. And finally, to finish off this background, I watered down some white acrylic paint, and I'm just splattering it on the panel. And then we'll be ready for final assembly. So here I'm just putting on some thin foam tape onto the back of my panel. And I'm going to pop that up onto an A2 card base. And I think it may have been in my last video I used a cream color card base, and that's what I'm using again today. It's so pretty. So because the Seahorse is going to be mostly on top of this 3D area, I'm just trying to figure out placement and where I'm going to need foam dots for the parts that aren't on that area. And I think here I'm going to put a little bit of foam tape on his belly because nobody wants a saggy belly. So really from here, it's just getting everything positioned properly and making sure I have room for my sentiment that I forgot about. This card was really fun to make. I really enjoyed it. It was just nice to get back to just basic ink blending and relaxing watercoloring. And it just turned out so pretty, I think. So here you see me adding all the foam dots to the back of the sentiment. And I think just the last finishing touch, I added some clear enamel dots. I think these happen to be from Waffle Flower. And I'm just going to add 3. And I'm going to call it done. So here's the finished card. I really love it. Blue is my favorite color, and turquoise especially, so this card really is my jam. All right, let's move on to the next card. I am using a different brush this time. This is a watercolor brush. It's the kind that you typically would put water inside, but I don't do that. I just use it like any normal brush. A couple years ago when I started using these kinds of brushes, I had a few mishaps where like water would just glob out. And so I was kind of hesitant to use them. Believe me, I think it's user error, but I was taking an online class one time, and somebody who's much better at watercoloring than I am was using this kind of brush, and she also didn't fill it. So I felt kind of validated, but trust me, it's probably user error. But you can use it as a regular brush, just like I'm doing. And this has a little bit of a finer tip to it, so I can get into these little spaces. Now for the shells, I'm using a much more muted color palette, but muted color palettes are not my thing really. So you will see me come in at some point. I'm going to bring in, yeah, there I go with the salvage patina. And I think even at some point I bring in a brighter green color. I think I bring in Twisted Citron. But these shells were fun to color, especially this one, to kind of bring in all the different colors. And yeah, I think there's where I brought in some Twisted Citron on this shell. And then I brought in some antique linen. So really, these shells were super fun to paint, and the whole thing was just relaxing. And once in a while you'll see me dabbing the paper with my paper towel, and that's when I am trying to lighten up an area, and I just bring in some water and kind of sop it up with the paper towel. And again, that's why watercolor is so forgiving. Now I say that, but in a minute you're going to see a shell. Yeah, that one in the middle was not so forgiving. We're not going to use that one. But here are the matching dies, which make it so convenient. And the matching dies, I have to say, cut out the images perfectly. And there they are. So now we're going to get started on this background, and I already stamped a sentiment from that same stamp and die set, and I gold heat embossed it. And again, we're going to do some simple ink blending with Distress Oxides. And I think we're going to use that same Altenew blending tool. Yep. So again, just very, very simple ink blending today in my favorite colors. I think Salvage Patina has become my favorite color. Sometimes it switches, but turquoise is just always going to be my favorite. And for sand, I always end up doing the antique linen with a little bit of vintage photo. So here you see me using a smaller brush to bring in some vintage photo along the edge. And then I'm going to do the same with the Savage Patina. I'm going to use a smaller brush just to darken it up a little bit. Now here I'm just covering the blue area, and I'm going to wet down these inks and splatter it just to give it a little bit more of a look of sand. And this is an old fan brush from my stash that isn't really cooperating, so you're going to see me smack my hand, and that'll really get it splattered. So here I have just a piece of heavy white cardstock that I'm going to attach to the back of my panel. And this is just going to give it just a slight dimension off the card base. I always like to do that. It just makes the card feel just a little more substantial, a little more special. And here I am arranging the shells. Now, I think I was arranging these shells for like 12 hours. And yes, I'm exaggerating, but it felt like 12 hours. And this was a lesson learned because the first time I arranged them, it took me 5 seconds and I loved it. And then for some reason I took them off. And then here I am coming back to it, and I could not remember how I had arranged it that first time. So I don't think I ever got it back to the way I had done it the first time, but oh well. So here I'm going to glue some of them down, and then I'm going to pop some of them up on foam tape for dimension. So one of these I'm going to put on the thin foam dots, and then the one next to it I'm going to use some thicker foam tape just to make it stand out from the other one. And then I'll glue that last one behind first. See, you can see me just constantly trying to figure out where I want these placed. So this card is a little bit more muted than I normally do, but I just think it's so pretty. I think anybody would enjoy getting this card. And here I'm finishing with some pearl embellishments because you got to put some pearls around shells, right? And that is it for that card. I love it. I really do. All right, let's switch gears and move on to stitching dies. So these are the stitch numbers. And if you remember from last year, they came out, Spellbinders came out with the stitched letters. So now we're completing the collection with the numbers. And they all have a matching shadow die. And here's the second set from this collection. This is the punctuations and symbols. So we have an ampersand, we have a hashtag, we have quotation marks, there's an exclamation point and a question mark. And I think this set is so much fun. So for my first card, I'm going to play with that hashtag, and I'm also going to show you that you don't have to stitch with these dies. In fact, half the time I use these dies, I don't stitch. And you also can use them with or without the shadow. So here I'm creating my own shadow for this card, and I did that because I'm going to be creating a shadow for these little letters from the lowercase, the Be Bold Lowercase Alphabet set. So I kind of wanted my hashtag to match that. And so what you do is you just cut it a second time from a different color, from a contrasting color, And you're basically just making a faux drop shadow look. And there I was pointing at, I had put a white piece of paper behind the holes in that stitching die, just because otherwise you would have seen black through those holes. And that would have been cool, but that's not the look I was going for. So here you see me creating the little drop shadow on these little letters. And you just offset it a little bit. And I think it gives such a cool look. So for my card base today, I embossed a white panel with the Puff Daddy embossing folder, and I just put it on a gray card base. And I'm gluing on the hashtag. And here I've glued on the letters. And here's my sentiment. This is one of the reverse happy sentiment strips. These come in a pack with tons of sentiments that you can just cut with your trimmer, and it's just so easy. And I'm just going to finish this card with some colorful enamel dots. And these are from Waffle Flower. And then I just want to draw your attention to these. These are white enamel dots from Concord and Ninth, and I had been on the hunt for white enamel dots because a lot of the white enamel dots I have, they're like an off-white, but these are true white. So if you're on the hunt for them, here they are. And I'm just putting them over the middle hole in the stitching area, which I think is kind of a fun look. I think this card is really cute and happy, and I think it would make anybody happy. I think what I want to do is make it in a slimline form and use bigger letters. You could do hashtag love or hashtag whatever. I think it'd be really fun. All right, here we are at our last card. I have already foiled the happy anniversary sentiment onto my card. And this card is for my parents. So this is a pretty special card to me. Off camera, I have already stitched the numbers, and I did some basic stitching. Now, normally I use 3 strands or 4 strands of embroidery floss for my stitching, but this time I used 6, and I kind of like it. It looks kind of weird on camera, but in real life, I like the 6 strands. These flowers are from the Be Bold Blooms. And, you know, half of making this card was just figuring out placement. And I did bring in a few smaller flowers from the Mini Blooms and Sprigs set. And the centers of those big flowers are actually from the Punctuation and Symbols set. I stitched the little circles that are from the exclamation point or the question mark, and I used those as the centers of the flowers, which I think is really fun. And here you'll see me, here's the back of one of those, and I'm just going to put glue on the stitching. And when I put it on the flower, I'm just going to use my reverse tweezers to clamp it until the glue dries. And while we watch me do all of this placement, let's talk about the blue elephant in the room. I haven't put out enough videos for you to realize yet, but I never paint my nails. I never get manicures. I think the last time I got a manicure was probably for my wedding. I'm going to take a break and just show you all the foam tape that I put on the back of this number, because you have to put foam tape to compensate for all the stitching that's built up on the back. All right, back to my nails. I broke my ankle back in November, and I have not gotten a pedicure since October. Now, pedicures are my jam. I would get a pedicure every day if I could. Manicures, not so much. I find them to be painful. I always feel like the nail polish is gonna chip off my fingers. But so I went to treat myself for a pedicure the other day. My very first pedicure in over 5 months. And I don't know what possessed me to get a manicure, but that's what you see here. And of course, it's in my signature turquoise color. My husband and I are also celebrating our anniversary this weekend. So maybe that's why I decided to splurge on the manicure. But my parents are celebrating 58, which is odd because they're celebrating 58 years and I'm only 29. So I don't really know how that works. But I wish. My husband and I are actually celebrating 15 years. So that's exciting. Our anniversary is 9 days after my parents. And I actually got this card out in the mail today to my parents. Finally. It's a little late. So here you see me just gluing everything down. And this little guy, I tried to create a new flower with one of the little stitching ovals and some elements from the Be Bold blooms. So that little guy right there, I keep trying to find a place for it. And I just keep playing around. I don't know why I felt like I had to have it, but I finally found a place for it. And so now we're just doing final assembly, gluing everything down. I think my mom is really going to love this card. So it's always nice when you make a card with somebody specific in mind. A lot of times I don't do that, but when I do, it just makes it all the more special. And the pink and green, those were actually my wedding colors. So whenever I think anniversaries, I always tend to go pink and green. So here I'm going to add some little jewels to the center of my stitches, the little circle stitches. And these are fairy jewels from Memory Box. And I'm kind of trying to match the color of the embroidery floss that I used. So here I actually found it's very dark red, almost dark berry color for the hot pink thread. But later on, as I was putting all these fairy jewels back in my drawer, I realized that I actually had hot pink jewels, so I did replace them. And then for the final embellishment, I'm using just some sparkling clear sequins and just putting those around the flowers. And we are done. I think it turned out so pretty. And by the way, this is an oddly shaped card. It's 4 3/4 by 6 1/2, but it fit very perfectly into a 5 by 7 envelope. And there it is. I really appreciate you visiting me again today. I hope these cards put a smile on your face. As always, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to my channel. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.